This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Two disclaimers, this video will have spoilers for all of Interview with the Vampire and all of the content you would expect from a vampire-related series. And I have to apologize, I had an audio mix-up where I had the wrong microphone attached, so I had to use the audio from my camera. I am so embarrassed at this long doing this that it happened, but it did, and I didn't have time to redo it. Also, I looked really good in the video, so I didn't want to have to do my makeup all over again. So I hope you will bear with me. I adjusted it to try and make it flow as best I could. So yeah, thanks for watching. Racebending has been a massive talking point in media for a lot of my life. For most of cinematic history, whitewashing has been a regular occurrence, changing a character of color into a white character. Due to anti-miscegenation laws, it was not possible to cast a non-white actor in a role where they would end up in a romantic relationship with a white person, nor were non-white actors seen as bankable. So you got years of this.
How many Murgats did you observe?
30? No more.
We'll take twice that number. Call Bagurci and Sabaya.
Additionally, studios had no problem with taking one brown actor and having them play any race. Take EGOT Rita Moreno, who played Tip Tom in The King and I
am watched too closely.
If we were to look at examples of a popular actor of color taking on a traditional or usually white role, you maybe look to Denzel as Don Pedro in Much Ado, along with Keanu Reeves playing Don John, Will Smith in Wild Wild West. It happened once in a while, but not enough of a regular occurrence to cause full-on meltdowns the way it does now. People weren't really actively that mad about Jessica Alba playing Sue Storm or Michael Clarke Duncan as Kingpin. And there were definitely some complaints. I'm not going to erase and pretend it was just a wonderful land, but in that era of the internet, you just didn't have as much whinging as you do now because there weren't as many venues to do that, especially not as loudly. And also, most people now agree that Michael Clarke Duncan ate that role. So R.I.P. King. I wish I could just combine him and Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin into just one. The first time I heard the term racebending was during the casting for The Last Airbender by M. Night Shyamalan, where questionable choices were made about the casting of all the characters, but especially the whitewashing of the three leads from clearly Asian and Native characters to Jacob from Twilight. In recent years, one of the ways projects will inject diversity into a work that didn't have some before will be by adding one or two characters of color into a series, often by changing a white character into a non-white character. Now, I am personally working on a larger project about this topic and its overlapping issues, but for the context of today, I will just say what I believe. Most BIPOC people, at least the ones that I'm in community with, we want works by BIPOC creators to be adapted. That is the ultimate goal. That is the ultimate goal. We don't have secret agendas to steal all your redheads. That's just what other white people end up doing, and then we get the blame for it. When this racebending does happen, we support the actors because they become the face of this larger anti-diversity, anti-inclusion rhetoric, and you don't want to see these talented people being dragged for choices they didn't make and were often made by white people behind the scenes. Even if we don't like the project, the ability to discuss that without getting lumped in with bad faith racists is deeply frustrating. Part of the reason why it sucks to talk critically about The Witcher, Rings of Power, anything Star Wars is that even when you are critical, if you're not hateful or anti-woke, people will still act as though you are defending things or harass you or pretend that they know more than you and basically allow their ignorance about diversity, give them a giant chip on their shoulder to come into your comments and belittle you because, God forbid, Star Wars be woke, because it's not as if George Lucas made it as an allegory about the Vietnam War, but whatever. I guess we don't have your anti-woke media literacy training. I'm going to speak solely from a black perspective, is that oftentimes these characters get horrible storylines, styling, and romantic interactions. They are put on as the face of the series' diversity while being given no protection. And even if they end up being the best part of the series, it doesn't stop the horrible treatment they get and the amount of anti-blackness we as fans have to experience, especially for a character that end up being honestly a net neutral representation-wise. We have to fight about this in video games. The amount of anti-Will slander I hear about my sweet baby boy, I literally don't understand how people can hate Will. I'm like, if you're gonna hate a boring, like, straight coded, which none of them are straight coded, you can romance any of them as any gender, so again, very weird. But if you're gonna do that, Gala's right there, girl. I mean, if you're gonna throw one under the bus, I mean, Gala is right there, and he's eating your shit. That being said, on the rare occasion where an adaptation manages to take an original source material, race bend it, and change things, and it's good, that feels great. And one of the rare examples of that happening was the AMC adaptation of Interview with the Vampire. But I think it's important to talk about how we got to this place about Interview with the Vampire, and why in particular that show just manages to do it right.
Anne Rice brought vampires back from the dead. Before her best-selling Vampire Chronicles, they were mainly seen as campy, unappealing B-movie types with little erotic appeal. Anne Rice made them sexy and asked the big questions about the relationship between immortality and immorality.
Published by Anne Rice in 1976, Interview with the Vampire is the first book in what would become the Vampire Chronicles. In it, the vampire, Louis Dupont-du-Lac, tells the story of his 200-year-old self to a reporter referred to as the Boy, who will eventually be revealed to be Daniel Malloy, a character who will be important in later books, but for right now, he's just a random twink. Louis is the owner of an indigo plantation in Louisiana, who, following the death of his brother Paul, becomes depressed and seeks out vices in order to bring about his own death. Pure Catholic guilt, but you can't commit suicide because you'll go to hell. That's the ticket. He is then approached by the vampire Lestat, who turns him into another being of the night. Louis is at first enamored by Lestat, but realizes that he's just a guy and gets disillusioned very quickly. Lestat feeds off of the slaves and other plantation owners, and Louis feeds off of the animals, finding it immoral to drink the blood of humans. A trailblazer in the genre. They eventually flee the plantation because they realize that the enslaved people are aware of their vampirism and decide to just kill them all and light the entire plantation on fire. Eventually, Louis decides to start feeding on people again, but he is disgusted by the callous way that Lestat treats people. While they are in New Orleans, Louis feeds on a girl with the plague and thinks about maybe it's time to actually break up with Lestat because this vampire situationship is not what he signed up for. So as a result, Lestat decides to baby trap Louis by turning that girl into a daughter for them named Claudia. Claudia becomes like the trademark enfant terrible and takes to killing very easily, but grows resentful that she will remain a child forever.
One of you did it! Which one of you made me the way I am?
And she decides to become, Freud's worst nightmare, greatest dream, and decides to kill her father figure by poisoning Lestat and slitting his throat. She and Louis drop his body into the swamp, and they go on a Euro vacation where they meet the vampire Armand and the Théâtre des Vampires. Getting kind of bored of what's happening in Paris, which I get it, girl. Paris, bedbugs, ugh. Claudia decides to convince Louis to make her own companion, the dollmaker Madeleine. But after doing so, they are all abducted. It turns out, spoiler alert, Lestat is alive and he is pissed as fuck and demands that Claudia be punished for what happened, but that they spare Louis. Claudia is killed along with Madeleine, and Louis decides to get his revenge on the coven after they bury him alive. Sans Armand, who he decides to go and date for 200 years until he realizes they have nothing more to kind of talk about. They have outgrown each other. And so they break up.
But the world was a tomb to me.
After telling his story, the boy wants to become a vampire, but Louis finds it very enraging that he missed on all of the contacts and media literacy skills to understand that, rages out and flees.
Do you like dying? Stop.
And so the boy decides to track down Lestat, who has his own story to tell that we find out more about in the sequels.
Oh, Louis. Still whining, Louis.
Lestat is kind of like one of the OG modern day breakthrough characters. He is certainly so much more popular than Louis and has become, a creature unto his own in terms of his popularity. And I think that in the further books you kind of get even more why. Especially because in the book, Louis is kind of whiny. Like, yes, I understand the pathos. I too also went to Catholic school, but also, girl, you're a plantation owner. I talked about this in my Confederate Vampire, which almost is at 1 million views, but Anne Rice's Vampire series really helped redefine the genre in ways that seem very stock at this point. From the depressed, non-human eating vampire, the morality, the queerness, all of those things that had some hints in older works, which was so true, but Anne Rice really took these things and gave vampires, for lack of a better word, their souls. And I'm not the first one to say this. This is a very tried and true thing about her. You know, and a poetic angst that would be repeated in vampire stories going forward. Not to mention the dynamic of like mopey vampire and stud vampire, you know. Spike, Angel, Stefan, Damon, Edward, much of Anne Rice's own grief was present in the books, as Claudia, Louis, and Lestat were all based in certain ways on pieces of herself, her husband, and in the case of Claudia, her own daughter who passed away at the age of 5 years old from cancer.
I mean, Louis was the hero. Everything revolved around Louis. Louis was me. I was Louis. I'm the only woman ever played by Brad Pitt in a movie. But I was truly Louis. That was me. And Lestat just sprang to life in the corner of my eye. I mean, this character took on all this ferocious life. Now, whether, you know, what that came from in my own life experience, whether that was my husband's presence, his vitality, I'm not sure.
This is why infamously Anne Rice was sort of anti-fanfiction. It wasn't just for the legality or things like that, which is certainly a part of it, but I think she also just found it very unsettling about people playing with essentially her own paper doll therapy tool characters. And you can argue about yourself if you think that's valid or not, death of the author, etc. I just personally think I have empathy for her being like, it's weird to see people treat the character I made of my dead child in a sexual way. I think it's okay for her to feel that way. Do I think she should have banned fan fiction? No, I have several tabs open at this moment on AO3. So clearly I don't agree with that. But it is what it is. And speaking of, there is a podcast I'm making with two of my friends called Open Tabs about fanfiction coming out soon. The series would grow to include 12 books total, including crossovers with the Mayfair Witches trilogy, which was also adapted into a much worse TV show. I have a video about that on my Patreon at the Terror level for anyone who might be interested. I think there was plenty of criticism to be had about Anne Rice and how the series evolved into sort of like a chaotic melange of genre, self-indulgence, and religious exploration that goes back and forth. But I think that the fact that Anne Rice's vampires have outlived her and transformed the genre successfully speaks to the quality of her work. I think that no matter what you think of the rest of the books in the series, like Interview is a really good book. I think it's just like the perfect gothic vampire experience for people who want to understand why people view vampires the way they do. And with the success of the series, it's not surprising that it would go on to make a movie.
So you want me to tell you the story of my life?
Initially, the rights for Anne Rice's book were obtained in 1976, right after the book was published. The script that they had stayed in development hell for years until it eventually landed at Warner Brothers. Neil Jordan, who was tapped to direct, had just finished making The Crying Game. He wanted to basically adapt it, but to write his own script. It was given a $70 million budget, which was very high at the time, especially because vampires still hadn't really proven their bankability. The closest thing that you would have had at this point was the Coppola movie, which I talked about last year. The top pick by Anne Rice was Julian Sand, R.I.P., but he was pushed away in favor of Tom Cruise because he was seen as a more bankable star, but he drank up the budget of $10 million for this role. But we'll get to him in a second. River Phoenix was originally cast as Daniel Malloy, but he unfortunately passed away before filming was done, so Christian Slater took up the role in the film. Julia Stiles was the only other actress of note mentioned to be considered for the role, but she was considered too old, and ultimately it went to Kirsten Dunst, who was spotted and then cast as Claudia. In terms of making the film come to life, at a certain point, Anne Rice apparently thought that Hollywood was just too homophobic and considered making Louis a woman and having the role played by Cher, which is erasure. But I would watch that cut of the movie. That would be the most amazing drag performance of all time.
I'm gonna marry him. Do you hear me? Last night never happened, and I'm gonna marry him, and you and I are gonna take this to our coffins.
I can't do that.
Why not?
I'm in love with you.
Snap out of it!
If someone can find a way to combine all of Cher's filmography and make it fit to Interview with a Vampire, That's why we have the internet. Brad Pitt was cast as Louis, a role that he admits he had a miserable time making and he wanted to get out of it, but he couldn't, so he just pouted the entire time. Out of the cast, for the fans and Rice herself, Cruise was the most divisive choice. She didn't want him at all, and she actually would have preferred and wanted to have Cruise and Pitt switch their roles very desperately. It's quite funny how much she did not want that man in that role. It reminds me of how in Stephenie Meyer's headcanon, the top picks for Edward and Bella were, at the time, Henry Cavill and Emily Browning. Like, you think they're already trying to cast Henry Cavill for every role now? Trailblazer. When the film opened in November 11th of 1994, so anniversary coming right up the corner, hello, it was a box office success. It surpassed Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, and at the time had the 5th largest 3-day opening weekend of all time and the highest rated R rating opening of all time. The reviews were mixed and now it has about a 63 rating, but it was really praised for its design, cinematography, and Tom Cruise, he really popped out and showed haters because his Lestat is delightful. Like, I think that he's excellent in the role. He's not Lestat in my mind. Like, I don't see him when I read the book, but he's so committed to it. Like, it is really one of his, like, best performances.
Why do you do this? I like to do it. I enjoy it. Take your receipts, taste pure things. Kill them swiftly if you will. But do it! For do not doubt! You are a killer, Louis!
While his and Sam Reeves, who does it on the TV show, are very different, they are both like the S tier. Poor Stuart Townsend.
Me. I'm over it!
Based on the 3rd book in the Vampire Chronicles series, skipping over the Vampire Lestat, we got Queen of the Damned. So you have to understand for the first part, right? In the book, Lestat wakes up from his sleep from hearing like, what we would consider like classic rock, like. In the film, he's broken up from his sleep due to the sound of nu metal.
It became worthwhile to rise again as new gods were born and worshipped.
And I'm gonna just say this right here in front of y'all, okay? I am a metal fan. I love symphonic metal. I grew up listening to Metallica. I played so much garage band. I love rock music. I love metal. I even have a soft spot in my heart for some elements of nu metal because I am of an age. Okay? But I cannot believe that Lestat would listen to the sweet, sweet sounds of Limp Bizkit and be like, I must awaken from my nap to discover what this alluring sound is. It strains the imagination. But essentially, he reveals the entire existence of vampires. He flaunts it, becomes the lead singer of this band. His maker is like, girl, don't do it. You're gonna wake up Akasha. And Akasha wakes up, and it's a mess. And then Akasha is hot. I have an Akasha art on my wall, but it's all the way up there, so you can't see it. So I'm gonna put a picture of it here. I gotta admit to you, I can't watch this movie. I've only watched the Aaliyah cut, which is I've only watched the Aaliyah scenes. I watched the first 35 minutes of this movie, and I had to leave. I couldn't do it. People really appreciate Aaliyah and the soundtrack, which I do love. Hell in Your Eyes is a Billboard's Hot 100 song in this house, right? I really like it. I even made an A&B to that song ages ago. And I'm sure there are people who genuinely like it, but it's just a mess. It only made $45.4 million on a budget of $35 million. Quick math will tell you, not good. Fairly recently, I rewatched League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I have to say, his Dorian Gray, you see why they would think that would work. But it don't. He gives it his all, but it's just very not great. And Rice urged people to forget about the film, and many have. The only real value it has to me is being one of the few examples of like vampire black representation. You had one really successful movie adaptation of this series. You got one really iconically bad one. After that, we would get more vampire series, more books. Even at that era, you had Underworld, you know, you had Van Helsing, which is a bad, amazing movie. Queen of the Dead wish it could be Van Helsing. You know, Van Helsing is a horrible movie, but when that baby came out in 4K, you know I bought it. Best $9 I've ever spent in my life. Because Kate Beckinsale is the epitome of beautiful gowns in that movie. She don't do a motherfucking thing. But she looked good the whole time. And the brides, excellent. No notes. How they did the design change, everything. Dracula's having a great time. But the plot, the story, the Roma stuff is very messy. But one of the best werewolf designs of all time. Queen of the Dead wish it could be Van Helsing. But it would be decades before we saw Anne Rice's vampires back on screen in any way. And I don't think I would have ever imagined it happening the way that it did.
I offer, for your journalistic pleasures, my life story.
So, how long have you been dead?
2016. This is when Anne Rice got the rights back to her work and decided that if it's gonna be adapted this time, it's gonna be a fucking TV show, because that's what she's always wanted and that's what she fucking deserves. In 2020, AMC Network got all the rights to 18 of Rice's novels. Sadly, Anne Rice would pass away before the series would premiere. Cast as Lestat was the Australian actor Sam Reid, whom I knew from the movie Belle, which showed up in my previous video. The biggest news, at least for me, was when Jacob Anderson was cast as Louis. Anderson was probably best known to me and others for playing Grey Worm in Game of Thrones, a role that was notable but gave very little indication of the range he would go on to show as Louis. Turning Louis from a slave owner in the 1700s to a Creole pimp at the turn of the century was a dramatic change, and the fear was like two very different ones. You of course had the racist and hyper book purists who don't like changes from the book. Contrasting that were people who were worried, like myself, that this was going to be another example of a series putting a black face on a white character, getting claps for diversity while delivering like bare bones examination of blackness. And thankfully, I think we got a lot better than we ever thought we were going to have.
Take a black man in America, make him a vampire, fuck with that vampire, and see what comes of it.
From the very beginning, Louis' blackness is not an aesthetic. It is a fundamental character reworking. He is not totally disconnected from Book Louis, because you still have the self-loathing, the complex familiar relationships, the push and pull with his relationship with Lestat and other vampires, Claudia. But the addition of race is used to complicate his already difficult feelings with his vampirism. His relationship to Lestat was always tinted with abusive elements that just come from vampire fiction. In my opinion, vampires are just non-con beings by default, but with Lestat being a white man, there is a further power dynamic that comes up in flashbacks that is also darkened by Louis' own perspective as a black man telling this story. By expanding Louis' relationship with his family, his class, his race, it also, in my opinion, makes him a far more compelling character than Louis in the books, because we as a modern audience understand how racism has shaped his reality. In the books, Louis is kind of boring. He just happens to be a really hot guy going through a depressive spiral who gets bitten by a vampire. And while yes, the queerness is there, I think that the more explicit ways in which Louis has to harden himself, toughen himself up in order to present himself to the world translates really well to his anxieties about being a vampire. He is genuinely a soft man, and it's like, you know, don't be a hard rock when you really are a gem. But that is who Louis is. He tries so hard to be strong for his family, to be a provider, to be sort of like the black, strong, male provider character, but at the expense of his own soul. So he is someone who's already felt for a long time that he had to sacrifice himself to do things. And so the vampirism adds to that. How much more is he expected to give? How much can he sacrifice before he no longer understands the shape of his own heart anymore? You know, like that is what makes that character so much richer to me.
The lie you told about leaving the opera house early. You were near weeping when the curtain fell. Why hide that from your family?
The bond between Claudia and Louis is grown because he more actively wants her, but they are also two black people with a white creator who lords information from them and keeps them in ignorance for their own good. So much of Louis' own desire to belong and be safe is rooted in the uncertainty of money and power. So it makes sense why he's attracted to two very powerful and emotionally toxic men. I think by giving him that autonomy for Claudia also shows how he does see the dark gift as a gift and was willing to give it to someone else rather than do the right thing. And again, that complicates his own morality because at the end of the day, he was a pimp. He was someone who was used to using other people to make his money. So at a certain point, he's also used to using people for emotional needs, physical needs, and to a certain degree, spiritual needs. And I think those things are compelling for a character like him. Claudia is a hard character to translate due to her age. Claudia is meant to be an immortal 5-year-old, and even aging her up to 14 and 16 changes a lot. Add on to that, now Claudia is a young Black girl and therefore has to deal with her own body's infantilization along with societal adultification and dealing with that as a Black girl but also in her own family. Her entire relationship with Louis is adultification because in the end she has to become the parent in order to get him to leave a toxic relationship. She's always going to be dependent on them in certain ways, and that vulnerability is present, but they are also very emotionally immature. And because Louis doesn't really know how to parent or guide, he ends up making very typical mistakes. We see in the difference between season 1 and season 2 that in Europe and France she tries to seek out their purpose. I will say there is some, in my opinion, lack of connective tissue between Claudia in season 1 and season 2. Not just in the actor, I think they're both really excellent, but I think that it's how the characters' motivations are written. Like, yes, Claudia is older mentally as we go through these seasons, but as my friend Maven Lisa said in our longer interview on Nebula, that little girl trapped in a tiny body doesn't really come out in season 2 until she's forced to perform the show over and over again. You know, we saw her in that first season chopping up bodies, really dealing with this kind of way of which the dysmorphia of her body, of how it's never going to match up how she sees herself. And while that does happen, I think it happens a little bit focused towards the end. I think the race bending in this show works overall because race issues are built into the show and the story, so they interact together. It's never irrelevant to the characters' choices, interactions, and therefore doesn't feel shallow. It really feels as though they did consider what it would be like for these characters to exist in this skin, in this body. That being said, I have seen some complaints that in this more grounded and racially realized story that we miss out on the glitz and glamour of the vampires traveling like in the books. And I do understand that this element of wish fulfillment would have been fun because we have normalized the idea of vampires being rich and therefore having all this economic distance. On a personal level, I do really like seeing vampires having to navigate the realities of like traveling while different while not being privileged. That's why I'm a tired defender of Byzantium, also by Neil Jordan, because for all of its weirdness, I do love seeing a story about vampires who have to deal with being immortal while also broke and having been marginalized in their past, and that marginalization making them scrappy as a result. So I do understand that, and I do think it would have been nice for this show to have a better balance between like them struggling through World War II and being able to have a more decadent lifestyle. I think it's possible to have both wish fulfillment and also discuss race. Both seasons feel different in terms of their energy, and upon rewatching the first season with my boyfriend, who's not familiar with the original work or the movie, it was fun revisiting just how kinetic and emotional everything is. Like, we live in an era of like chronic anti-sentimentality. Big emotions are just treated with a hand wave of cringe. You know, at every turn, I think the show believes in Louis' story. It allows him to be a protagonist. It's very easy to be swallowed in by Lestat, especially in the books, because Louis is a man who has morals, but only when he wants. You know, a slave owner who somehow only cares after becoming a vampire about the value of human life. Adding marginalization to Louis actually gives him a reason to angst about his eternal life, because no matter how powerful he is, that power came to him through a white man. How must that feel as someone who works so hard to like overcome the racial issues you deal with? Like, what does it feel like that even when he had someone he considered a daughter and a sister within his guardianship, he could not protect her because he was always distracted by filling up his own cups of desire? How he tried to find an ally, another man of color, as his lover, and he failed him as well. Well, I don't think it's often done well. What makes the vampire like a compelling figure for marginalized supernaturalification, for lack of a better word, is how it can take anyone, even the lowest of the low, and give them the potential to be a god, to be powerful, to stand up for themselves, yet still have to live in the shadows, unless they have a black witch to abuse. But again, I don't think the show is perfect. I think that sometimes the characters are at odds with the choices and fates of their book canon counterparts, especially Claudia. You know, I love Claudia. I love both actresses. I think they're both excellent at the role. But I also don't feel like the Claudia that we see in the show would have gotten killed by the Theatre de Vampire. Or would have had a white lover, to be quite honest. I feel like her Madeline would have been black. Claudia in the show is such a very independent, smart, clever character. Yes, she's impulsive and has that, but I also don't see her staying there and being long enough, especially because in the book she's not interested in the theater. In the show she is, and I feel at a certain point like she'd want to leave anyway, because Claudia's ending is rooted on the show in the codependent relationship that Louis has with her, and also a sexual component that's not present in the show either, at least not beyond.
How are you gonna fix it, huh? Which one are you gonna me?
And I think of all the choices that they've made in the show in terms of adaptation, the two that I'm still kind of wrestling with is Bruce and the domestic violence. I really don't feel like Claudia being tortured and assaulted is necessary for her character. I remember rewatching that episode and I still don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary for Bruce to exist. I think that storyline for Claudia is very weird. I don't think it adds anything. I don't really think Rape's backstory makes any sense. And I think that it takes away from the ultimate issue of her just wanting to leave Lestat. I don't think that she needs to be in a situation where she is brutalized and broken and then comes back. And then because it's also the fight happening and Lestat and Louis being bruised and broken. I feel like I don't want the fact that it's a gothic drama, the fact that they are, you know, vampires, for it to be an excuse to see them be unnecessarily brutalized when it's not something that happens in the source material. I do think that Lestat and Louis have a violent, abusive relationship, but I think that a few of the hits and then Lestat dropping Louis out of the sky would be just as effective. I enjoy the narrative complications of seeing who's telling the right story about how it's different from Louis' perspective, from Claudia's perspective, from Lestat's perspective, like what's the ultimate truth. At the same time, I think in the fandom, the desire to find like who is the one true abuser, who is the one true victim is like not the correct approach. I think like while in real life mutual abuse isn't a thing, and I think even in the show like there are definitely more elements of Lestat than Louis, but these are all people who are morally gray, who are not working within the margins of, you know, regular domesticity. I think that it's okay for it to be complicated, and I think that this desire as well to make it a simple, is it okay for me to ship them, yes or no question, is sort of like, I don't know, it speaks to this desire to again have puritanical taste, to be like, I want to have the right opinion, can I like this character, rather than what do these complicated relationships say about the characters? What does it say that the vampires all have these dark relationships? Because it's not just Louis and Lestat, it's Louis and Armand, it's going to be, you know, Armand and Lestat. That is there something about being a vampire that blurs the lines of what it means to actually have sentimental attachment? If you are seeing other people who you used to look like as food, at a certain point you dehumanize all of them. That's why else would they have those rules? Why else would it be a law not to kill another vampire if it wasn't for the fact that like to be an immortal creature means that you don't value life? You know, like that is the, you know, it's like that's what makes it interesting. But then you don't value life, but then you also want to have companionship because you have that humanity in you. How do you balance all that kind of stuff out? That is the thing that is interesting. And I just honestly, I feel like nothing in the show can really shock me since we opened the series with like Lestat fisting a priest in a non-sexy way.
I own the night.
Alright, so this is the rambly part of the video since I didn't script this part, so bear with me. A lot of what Interview the Vampire gets success out of is that people were surprised by the care and the consideration, and while there have been divisive moments, and in the comments I would love to hear more about what you think, I think where it succeeds is that it cares very deeply about the characters, the story, and doing justice to them. And also in understanding that there doesn't have to be one true right or wrong. That memory is malleable, that emotions are malleable, that traumas can be implanted to different people at different times. That we can have characters that love each other, but let each other down. That we can have people who, like, you know, Lestat is so horrible at times to Louis, then also deeply, deeply, deeply loves him. And I think that when you have monsters, because that's essentially where vampires are, being the way that we tell these stories, I think that we should use it as a sense to interrogate our own hearts and our own minds, and not just allow it to be like a purity test of like, is good, is bad. You know, it's like, what does it say about the human capacity to harm what you love? You know what I mean? And when it comes to race bending, I feel like the disappointments I've had from most shows is that it feels as if when the character becomes non-white, tenderness is lost, care is lost, sensitivity is lost. Like, I remember reading the Sookie Stackhouse books and being like, not only is Tara white, but Tara is happy. And in the show, Tara is the antithesis of joy. She's always suffering, always unhappy, always miserable, always being abused. Why was her becoming black synonymous with her having a miserable existence? You know, why is it that in the book, Bonnie is like a main character, on tier with Elena, a love interest to like a major character? And why is it that when she's black, she is there to be a prop, a magical Negro, to have shitty love interests, all of them? I don't care what you have to say about Kai and Enzo. They suck. While there's an element of brutalization still happening that is not in the books with Louis and Claudia specifically, what I will say is that Louis and Claudia are complex, sensitive, thoughtful, cherished, hurt. They are everything. They are fully fleshed out, fully developed, fully realized characters who are tied to the canon realities of their book counterparts, but elevated in certain ways. Are there elements of the tragedies of their race that I feel could have been changed? Absolutely. I would not be unhappy if they were able to just have ultimate glitz and glamour and still have the same fate. I think that would have been better, honestly. I think that you can have them deal with racism, microaggression, and then like have a bunch of money and be fabulous in Paris. I cannot think of many shows that are at this level of a supernatural show that treat their black characters with as much care as they do on this show, which is sad. And I just, even when I think about Claudia in her final scene and her talking how she defends herself and that's the strength of character, in my mind, she just embodies so many young black girls who were forced to become adults very young, so who were forced to find companionship. And I will say, because I really like Madeline personally, I root for them, but I don't that character is written kind of weird. I don't know why she had to have sex with a Nazi. I feel like, you know, not that I agree with all the Parisians in general, but like, I think that is a little weird. I felt bad for him. I wouldn't have, girl.
I'm the vampire Madeleine Eparvier. And my immortal companion is Claudia. My coven is Claudia.
Claudia being able to die loved and die chosen is just like so sweet in terms of just like allowing that character to die with dignity and purpose, because I was dreading the death of Claudia the entire time, because it really sucks to have like a black female character be so well actualized and so realized, but then be fated to die. But that's kind of Claudia's whole thing, is that she had so much potential, so much things that she had yet to do, that she had been robbed of so much ability to grow, and at the very opportunity that she could have grown, it was taken from her. And that is a tenderness of storytelling for a black female character, especially in a vampire supernatural series, that we just do not get. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful to have the conversation. We can disagree about how it worked out, but I feel that they did it well. They did it well enough that we can talk about it. And it's not fridging. I beg of you, open the schools, or at least TV tropes. It's not fridging. It's not fridging. But yeah, I think that it succeeds because it cares. It treated the characters with dignity, and it, while imperfect, understood that if they were going to do this adaptation, that they would rather risk doing it with a mixed race, black, gay, Creole character with that at the very front than trying to humanize a white slave owner. I'm team that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. November is going to be a bit of a blitz, and in December we're going to have one big video that I just started working on that I hope you guys enjoy. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And just thank you so much. It's been a really kind of year, but it has been really fun to be making so much good stuff, and I've been really proud of all the stuff that I made this year, and I hope that you enjoy this video. And yeah, the lighting was good again. 2 videos in a row, not shitty camera angles. Looking to expand your skills, explore new hobbies, or advance your career? Look no further than Skillshare, the ultimate online learning community for creators and curious minds alike. Skillshare offers thousands of compelling classes in design, business, technology, and more. Whether you're a beginner trying something new out or an expert touching up on a new skill, there's something for everyone. Right now, what I've been watching, The Writer's Toolkit 2, Find Your Own Voice and Avoid Mistakes That Ruin a First Book, the class explored not just structural issues, but emotionally getting in the right space for writing. As someone who has a lot of anxiety about not just writing, but putting stuff up publicly, I always call it like the cycles of the high of releasing something and then the lows of being like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, is this gonna do well? This series of classes really spoke to how that emotional need to be ready is so important to writing a book. So I definitely recommend it as just another level of your writing class material. The first 500 people to use the link will get a month free trial of Skillshare. Invest in yourself and start learning something new today.
Ladies, not gentlemen, I'm addressing them, undressing them. Got elegance, means not quite yet to be eloquent. Get it then, that's good, you could be my guest, so let's take it to a fancy dinner. After we dine, I'm dancing with ya. Name's June and I got a rose, but I gotta go do what? I don't know, but you're not the one. Hey, shout outs to Adam, OG Vibe crew. I am not working on never living ever to get a chick. Is that much work? Whatever, bitch. Friend zone, yeah, go both ways. I'm a bright side looking, bright-eyed student. Sideline looking for discoveries of the guys and women couples, but I'm good looking enough. And fighting for love is overrated. There are other things I can do. Chilling with Adam, eating White Castle. Love ain't a game, more like a raffle. Gold tickets ain't gotten by skill, hard work or will. For real, you find him in chocolate. Ha ha. Bust out the Cheetos, we that, cause we ain't the heroes. We're the dudes drinking Mountain Dew, feeling pretty good about it all, and not shitty and pissed off. It's the small things that eat when you're broken and your heart feels like it's beat. Crush the shit off, cause I'm talking about a feast. So what's it gonna be? You want a number 3 from Blanco Fortress. On a date, make ladies swoon. Laying at a park, gaze at the moon. Smooth, in a poetic spot. You know I get her to talk, to put her head to my cut. That is not me, I am sloppy. I fuck up my witty one-lines and drop things. Not to over-exaggerate, but who get over a girl I master break. Dance to the walk, you know off, it will pass on and off. I love this girl, God only knows that's okay, cause I like roads. I like walking and I hate pity, long as I got my friends with me. Sooner or later I gotta get lucky, what I don't get is why I am drowning. Not caught in it, like that kid, and trails infinite, and quitting ain't a limit, but a limit so much I can take. I'm really giving when I kick it at the end of the day. That's all I can do, all there is to it. On to the next one after the music. I'm still June and I got a rose, but I gotta go do what? I don't know, but she's not. It's the small things that